All right, let's go ahead and get started. Just so everyone's aware again, this session will be recorded. And then also, if you do have a microphone, please mute it unless you have a question or a comment that you'd like to add. And it looks like if you, some people might not have microphones, which is fine. You could enter it in the chat box. I might not be able to attend to the chat box during the presentation section, but I'll try to get to any comments or questions at the end. So the plan for today is I'll probably give a presentation that's about 20 minutes. I'm hoping not to go longer than that. And then opening it up to Q&A for about 10 minutes. So hopefully that gives everyone an opportunity to ask any pressing questions that they might have. And then also, if you would like a copy of the presentation, I'm more than happy to share it. My email address is located in the announcement or the flyer for this. So you should be able to contact me that way if you'd like a copy of the presentation. All right. So to start, let me just introduce myself. My name is Leo Caraballo. I'm board certified in clinical psychology. I serve in various ABAP capacities. So one of them is I'm the early career psychologist trustee on the board of trustees. I'm also on the board of the American Board of Clinical Psychology. So if you have specific questions to regarding clinical psychology board certification, I can likely provide more nuanced responses. Regarding other specialty boards, I can certainly provide some responses or connect you with someone that can give you more details. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about general board certification as it applies to psychologists in public service. So ABAP is making additional efforts to reach out to psychologists that work in various government agencies or organizations. So that includes, of course, the VA, the Department of Defense, Bureau of Prisons, and others. So we're trying to make more efforts to inform psychologists in those settings about board certification and hopefully provide some answers to any barriers specific to those settings. So the first thing I want to cover is this concept of the credentialing continuum, and you probably already have this either use this kind of concept or you've certainly thought about this concept. Is in psychology, we kind of progress through different levels of professional development, and the way that we see it in ABAP is this is one board certification is one component of the credentialing continuum. So an accredited doctoral program is where many of us start, or that's where a lot of professional psychology training starts. And then you do accredited internship. And then depending on the specialty or personal interests, you may or may not do a postdoctoral residency. And then everybody gets licensed as to be a health service psychologist. In some states, there might be an additional designation process to be a health service provider. And then we see that the end of the credentialing continuum is board certification in a specialty practice area. Not that that's the end of training, because hopefully we're all lifelong learners and we continue our professional development. But that oftentimes, board certification is usually towards the end of our efforts in demonstrating a certain specialty practice. I'd like to share this slide because for many in government agencies, they may or may not be concerned with licensure mobility, but we never know what the future will hold and where our career will take us. So we might want to consider where we're licensed and where we might want to be licensed in the future. So this is, it's starting to get a little out of date. It's a few years old, but this is a chart of how different states recognize or perhaps not recognize board certification by the American Board of Professional Psychology. And you can see that many states, they're highlighted in green, offer some level of reciprocity. And many other states have some type of recognition, though it might not be full reciprocity. So why is certification necessary and essential in psychology? So one part of it is the exponential growth of psychological knowledge. There's definitely an issue of knowledge half-life when it comes to healthcare in general, but this is also true in psychology as a discipline and then also as a clinical practice. Our environments also impel us to specialize. So more and more healthcare systems, healthcare clinics are looking for someone to specialize in a particular type of intervention, a particular type of professional practice. So we're being asked to specialize more and more. And then our profession also reinforces specialization because of the research and training that we're provided. It's becoming, it's impossible for everyone, for someone to know everything. So more and more we're asked to know a very specific area of psychology, and board certification is one way of demonstrating that you have the competency in that specific area. So ABAP's mission is to serve the public by promoting the provision of quality psychological services through the examination and certification of professional psychologists engaged in specialty practice. So it's basically a recognition for the public, that's our primary goal, but then also it's recognition for institutions, it's a recognition for individual psychologists, it's a recognition for other disciplines on what it means to be board certified in a specialty practice. So I'm going to cover some myths. Some myths might feel true to you. Some myths might feel familiar. And then there's probably some myths that you thought, oh, I never thought that was a myth about board certification or ABAP. But I'd like to cover this because sometimes these are barriers that people have regarding their pursuit of board certification. So sometimes people believe it's largely academic or elitist. That's not true. So number one, you have to be licensed as a clinician to get board certified. So you have to be licensed at the doctoral level as a psychologist. So it's very practice focused. So the basis of ABAP is clinical work. That's what the examinations are looking for, is the clinical application of a specialty practice. Many board certified psychologists do work in academic settings, but many are not. So it's not just people work in academic settings. And then competent psychologists often do set a high expectation for themselves and for the profession, but I don't necessarily consider, and I don't think a lot of people consider that elitist. So the idea of adding another credential isn't necessarily elitist, at least in my opinion. And the expectation is that most people can pass. So the idea is that if you're practicing in that specialty, truly the hope is that you are competent in that specialty and that you could pass the board certification credential. It's not the expectation of ABAP or any of the specialty boards that there's a lot of people out there practicing a specialty in a way that's less than competent. Another myth is that licensing does it all. So licensing is generic. Are you really trained and competent in all areas? So just because someone's a licensed psychologist doesn't mean that they're fully competent in cognitive behavioral therapy. Just because someone's a licensed psychologist doesn't mean that they're competent in neuropsychological assessments. So licensing is a generic credential. So if you state you have a specialty, it would kind of make sense that you would also demonstrate that specialty with a credential like board certification. Also, medical staff privileges in many hospital systems are mandating board certification, and some healthcare systems now require board certification for all psychologists within that system. I don't need ABAP, so that could be a potential myth or barrier or concern. So although it's not intended as a marketing vehicle, it seems to serve as one for many people. So ABAP might not be needed, but it definitely can have value in terms of marketing. Patients might expect it without knowing to ask. That actually seems to be true. And I know there's some literature on this idea that patients assume healthcare professionals are board certified, and that's probably because there's been this expectation when it comes to physicians. So they probably think that board certification is universal for all healthcare providers. Also, board certification uplifts the entire profession. It demonstrates professional attention to specialty practice. Another myth is taking the ABAP exam may suggest I am not competent without ABAP. And I don't think that's necessarily true. So most, if not all, people that go through the examination process are going to experience some anxiety and trepidation and concern about what it's like to go through the examination. Taking or passing the exam demonstrates specialty practice. So someone can be competent in an area and maybe not do well in board certification in a particular specialty practice because maybe they have to further develop competencies in that specialty practice. There's always kind of a measure or bar or a hoop to jump through when it comes to professional development. So we've done many of these, right? So grad school, an internship, and maybe a postdoc, and H1P and other licensing requirements. So the idea is that our demonstration of competency or demonstration of specialty practice or professional development hopefully does not end. So I don't think it's many people pursue something like doctoral level practice of psychology with just hoping that they get their degree and never learn anything ever again. ABAP is only for seasoned experts. I think this is actually a fairly prevalent myth. There was a time years ago where that was commonly espoused. So for some people, they think of ABAP as only the top 2% of practicing psychologists. So in its roots and its current status, it's not that. I think there was a time where the culture of psychology thought it really had this narrow view of board certification, but I don't think that was really the intention of ABAP, and it's really not its current iteration. Most people pass within about 3 years after obtaining licensure. So many people don't wait a long time to pursue board certification. And just because someone is only a few years out of licensure, it doesn't mean that they're going to fail. Actually, there's an article that was published in 2019 regarding this specific issue, and it wasn't a statistically significant difference between early career psychologists and those later in their career and obtaining board certification or passing board certification. And as in medicine, the expectation is that one should complete education, training, internship, postdoc experiences, and become board certified. So medicine or physicians don't have this expectation that someone is decades out of their licensure, and that's when they get board certified. The expectation is much sooner than that. Another potential myth is some people mostly do training or serve in a training role, or they mostly serve as administrator, and they may not see patients very much, or maybe at all. So thus, no need to demonstrate specialty practice. Sometimes people raise that question. Well, that isn't necessarily true. So sometimes people that do a lot of training or serve as a director of training obtain board certification as a way of role modeling the demonstration of specialty practice and that professional development. Also, APA Commission on Accreditation increasingly has been talking about the importance of board certification amongst training programs and faculty. So it might be the expectation in some programs, or it might become an expectation for accrediting bodies one day in the future. Sometimes people think there's not a growth trend. So applications in about the last 6 years have tripled. And also nearly half of all applications are early entry, and I'll talk a little bit about that, or early career psychologists. So there does seem to be this trend that a lot of ECPs and students see ABAP as something that's important to pursue. Also, healthcare in general is pushing for mandates in healthcare providers obtaining more credentials. It just essentially helps them because a credential is a way of designating a public protection. So it helps sometimes with things like malpractice insurance. I actually haven't heard this myth that often, but apparently it's out there, is that ABAP is anti-science. So I don't think that's true, and I don't think any of the materials of ABAP would indicate that, but perhaps someone does think that. So ABAP relies on the scientific foundation of psychology and expects candidates to be able to demonstrate their practices are scientifically and evidence-based. So evidence-based practice and found scientific knowledge is very pervasive in the examination materials for all the specialty boards. Some of the potential benefits for board certification. So quickly review some benefits for practitioners, institutions, the profession, and the public. So practitioners. So for a lot of people, that first bullet point is probably the most important one to them. I can understand that. So some organizations potentially offer pay increases. For some people, there's a job satisfaction component. It might distinguish you. It might improve job security or employability. It might be this renewed emphasis or continued emphasis on lifelong learning. And I think for a lot of people, it affirms their professional identity. Some additional ones, so can increase interaction with hopefully outstanding and distinguished psychologists. Sometimes it helps with perceived credibility. Sometimes people perceive it as prestigious. Some organizations sometimes do. It can strengthen potential for meaningful contributions to the profession, can often streamline credentialing processes, and can also facilitate interjurisdictional licensure. Some institutional benefits. So again, credibility from the staff and faculty perspective can be perceived as a statement of focus of competency and specialty practice. So an example is the Mayo Clinic, I think several years ago, made it a requirement that their psychologists are board certified. Sometimes it's a self-assurance process for amongst staff or faculty that they have specialty practice designated through board certification. It can streamline credentialing or privileging processes within, for example, hospital systems, and again, that assurance for the public. For the profession, can set some standards for specialty practice. I think that's happening more and more. ABAP collaborates with a lot of organizations that are trying to define professional practice, and ABAP's criteria for specialty practice has been often included in those organizations' definitions of specialties. It can guide uniform training models for competence, increase breadth and depth of knowledge and skills and attitudes, ensure interprofessional regulation, allow for public recognition of a brand name. And then lastly, for the public, probably the most important one is the first one there is protecting of consumers. Could also be an assurance of quality, reduce confusion, and also increase likelihood of being viewed by consumers, professionals, organizations, licensing boards as highly competent in a specialty. So this is a fairly common concern, is which board do I get certified in? So I usually, very much as a psychologist, I answer a question with a question sometimes. So a way of kind of guiding people to the decision is consider what your primary self-identification is, and then also what you want others to see you. So sometimes that helps guide people decide which specialty to pursue. There are currently 15 specialties, specialty boards. However, that's rapidly changing. So there's a new specialty that's quite far along in development, and hopefully will soon, more information will be posted on the ABAP website. So these are the 15 specialties. One that's you probably will see in the near future is for serious mental illness. And then one that will likely be coming up in the near future, though I don't have the exact timeline, so because it's not still under consideration, is regarding addiction psychology. So the early entry option, to summarize the slide really quickly, it's essentially someone that's pre-licensure. So it's a student, it's an intern, it's a postdoc, it's someone that hasn't obtained licensures at the doctoral level of psychology. And what this allows is this early entry option, in addition to having a reduction of application fee, so it's a $100 discount, is that the person can already start banking their credentials. So they can bank their degree, their internship certificate, their postdoc certificate, their licensure. So it's a way of submitting credentials along the way, and you don't need to choose a specialty using early entry option. Until you've completed the generic credential review, you have an opportunity to change your mind. The early career psychologist, so this is post-licensure, but pre 10 years postdoctoral degree. And this one, for the most part, is this discount. So it's a $65 fee, which comes out to be a $60 discount. So this graphic is often used, kind of the progression. I'm going to highlight some pieces of this and how someone pursues board certification. So the credential review, the generic credential review, essentially is looking for an accredited doctoral program, an accredited pre-doctoral internship, and licensure at the doctoral level. And then this is where there's going to be a lot of variability, because the specialty-specific credential review is going to look for certain training experiences for each specialty. In order to get that level of detail, you're going to want to go to the specialty board website that's on ABAP to see what your specialty is asking for. Actually exactly two, specialty boards also require a written exam. So it's a multiple choice exam. That's for the clinical neuropsychology and the forensic psychology boards. And then all specialty boards require a practice sample. Now, how that practice sample is developed and selected and what's included in it is going to be specialty board specific. Oftentimes there's some kind of clinical case presentation, perhaps a video or audio recording, and other written documents. And then they all have oral exams. So the oral exams are approximately 3 hours, and there's going to be the specialty area domains covered, and then also review or questions associated with the practice sample that was submitted. And then there's always a legal and ethical issue or domain that's covered in some way. The exact process varies board to board, and it might be 3 or 4 examiners depending on the board. And then also there's different methods. So some boards, it's a committee, everybody meets all together. And then some boards, it's a station model where you meet with one examiner at a time covering a specific area. So where do you go from here? Well, the easiest answer is the ABAP website and look at those examination manuals to see what your potential specialty board requires and what their examination process looks like. Also, you can get a mentor. So many, but not all specialty boards offer mentors. And different specialty boards require you to be in different levels or areas of the progression of seeking board certification before you can be connected with a mentor. And then talk to ABAP. So talk to people that have their board certification, and that's helpful. It gets a personal experience, but don't rely on someone that got their ABAP on providing you details about how you pursue your ABAP, because the examination manuals are updated on a regular basis. So the way they did it might not be the current method anymore. And this is an important quote. It comes from Russ Bent, who's a former executive officer of ABAP. He said, it's not the exceptional specialist who should be board certified, but the specialist who is not board certified who should be the exception. So I think that's important for us to think about, is that if we're going to identify as a specialist, how do we demonstrate that specialist practice? There's other resources, of course. There's some books out there. Some of these books are getting a little dated. However, the general information is likely still to be current. And then here's some contact information. So David Cox is the current executive officer, so he's always open to answering questions, and you can certainly contact ABAP. So I'm going to open it up to any audio questions while I read the chat box. Anyone have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Sure.
My name is Karen and I practice in Michigan, and thank you so much for this information. My question is, I am board certified in clinical psychology, and I'm so excited to, when it becomes available, apply for board certification in SMI psychology.
Yes.
If that had been a specialty, I would have done that like right off the bat. Do you see any additional benefits to being like double board certified, or what are your comments on that?
Yeah, my comments on that is I often find it's two likely scenarios. Either kind of the scenario you described is someone obtains board certification and the maybe a more specific area that they were interested in wasn't a specialty board, and then they later pursue that because that's how they really identify. So maybe someone identifies as truly being more of an SMI focused psychologist. The other fairly common scenario is what we do over time changes. So sometimes someone gets board certified and then their career changes, and they want to become board certified because they go into a different area of practice, and they want their organization, their patients, or whoever to recognize that they have that specialty competency. So that, I think that's the most common one, where I find someone's board certified in multiple areas. And then for other people, it's just, you know, a goal or part of their professional development. I think 5, as far as I know, 5 board certifications is the record. I don't think that's so much about practice. That's probably more about the individual wanting to pursue that. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see if I can read some of these comments. So sounds like I answered the question about APIC versus APA approved. Yeah. So I think some of my prior supervisors are no longer living. Yes, this can happen. Can you use not having any complaints for 20 years as a benchmark? No, you still need to submit those credentials, but you probably can get for example, letters from the organization or the institutions where you completed certain things. ABAP uses ASPPB, uses the wrong word, has an agreement, that's a better language, has an agreement with ASPPB to do primary source verification. So there has to be primary source verification for all the submitted credentials. I'm not sure if I answered that question well enough for you, but if you have any,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say, if you have
I'm
any
on the phone now.
Okay, if you have any specific concerns, David Cox usually does the generic credential review and might be able to provide more nuanced questions. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's good. I will follow up.
Okay.
Actually, I have another question.
Sure.
One of my supervisors, and this is off the record, was really abusive, unfortunately, and I am concerned that she will refuse or give me a bad review, even though it was 20 plus years ago. I wasn't the only one, but anyway.
Yeah.
Which is what has prevented me from applying from ABPP prior to this.
Yes. Do you have whatever training that was on? Do you have a completion, like a certificate of completion?
Yes.
Oh, then that's
for
what you
my
submit.
Hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what you submit. There might be some nuance at the specialty board level if they want a candidate to demonstrate training in a very specific area, and that supervisor provided that training. That might be a challenge, but for the most part, it's if you, for example, if you had a challenging or difficult supervisor for internship, but you have the certificate of completion for the internship, you don't need to contact that supervisor.
Actually, most of this, experience was a really long time ago, and I submitted everything to the board of psychology in my state. Would that be okay if I get a copy of that? Because I don't know if I can find the originals.
That's probably fine, but I'm going to defer to Dr. Cox to make sure.
Okay.
Somebody asked if they can get a copy of my slides. Absolutely. So please email me and I'll happily send you a copy of my slides. And then any idea when the addiction, I'm guessing it's the addiction specialty, will be an option. I don't have an exact timeline. It's progressing in the development as a specialty board. What can happen is one of the pieces in that development is various stages of approval, but then also developing a board that can then do exams. So that has a variable length of time. So basically everyone has to demonstrate that they can pass the exam in order to give the exam. So I would say if you are very much dedicated to that specialty, I would check maybe again in 2022 and then regularly after that. I don't think it'll be up and running within this year. I think I covered all the chat questions, but if not, please let me know. Any other questions or comments, concerns anyone might have?
Yes, one more from me. This is Karen again from Michigan. I'm just wondering, because with Michigan, there really is no recognition. Do you have any tips or any resources as to how we can advocate and educate so that this is becoming more recognized in the states that it's not?
Yes. my first recommendation is always go to your state psychological association. ABAP doesn't truly have a lobbying component, and definitely don't have the resources for a state level of lobbying. However, some state associations have been successful in lobbying their licensing board and the legislature to recognize board certification. So not a perfect question. Do you want me do you have any follow-up questions I can give you any details about?
No, thank you. That'll be really helpful. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right. And Sam is prompting me, which is very helpful. So if anyone is currently board certified in any specialty, so you have your ABAP in any specialty, one of the programs that our committees work on, or task force works on, is having ambassadors, or essentially representatives in various government organizations, to be a point of contact, to disseminate information regarding board certification. So if you're potentially interested in that, or would like more information about that program, please feel free to email me and I can provide you more information. All right. If there's no other questions, I'll close the webinar. There's one chat question. If you register for the early entry option, is there a timeline for when certification is obtained? That's a great question. No, not really. So what will happen is on a yearly basis, the central office of ABAP will check in with you just to see if you're continuing to make progress or if you continue to maintain interest. Basically, they don't want people to fall off. So it's more of an accountability versus a hard deadline. All right. Oh, good. So it doesn't seem like there's any other questions. I hope all of you found this information useful. Please feel free to email me with any questions or for the slides. And thank you very much for joining us.